Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar. Today we are talking about the 20 essential checks you should be completing on your legal invoices or legal bills to help keep your budget under control. So what will we cover today? Firstly, what is legal invoice review? Our 20 recommended essential checks, and a little bit about us at Couto Grady. So, what is legal invoice review? Legal invoice review, or legal bill review as it's sometimes called, is the process of reviewing and analysing legal invoices against the client's billing guidelines. Sometimes clients call these outside counsel guidelines, sometimes they're called master services agreements, service level agreements, etc. There's lots of different names to be honest, but essentially what we're talking about is your relationship agreement, if you like, or contract between you and your law firm. It'll also include your agreed rates, but also the bill review process should check against generally accepted standards, we would suggest. Legal invoice review plays a major role in legal spend management, and it really helps drive savings and keep your budgets under control. So the next few slides we're going to run through the 20 essential checks. So the first item to check for, although they're not necessarily in an order, is typos. It's fairly hard to see it at a whole invoice level, but if you look at the line items, you'll often see the mistakes much more easily. For example, if someone's billed 20 hours for an email acknowledgement, you would think that that's a typo and it should have been 0.2 hours. We see quite a few instances of typos, and it's something to watch out for. Another item is trends. So looking globally at all of your invoices, are you noticing that firms are behaving in a way you wouldn't want them to? So acknowledging every email they receive, for example. That's the sort of thing that if you say to the firm, we don't want this anymore, you could take a lot of cost out, and we've seen that with some of our clients. Block billing is where a lot of individual timekeeper activities are billed under one description. So we've seen, for example, professional services, £1 million. Well, that doesn't tell you what you need to know about the invoice and the service received. So you should be pushing back on the firms and asking them not to block bill. Also goes to the next point around vague descriptions. Vague descriptions like emails is a really common one with law firms, where they'll just say email 10 minutes, email 10 minutes, email 10 minutes, and again and again and again, and you don't know what it is that they're actually doing. So you should ask for more explanation on exactly what they were doing. Double billing is something we see, and you need to keep an eye out for that as well. Two timekeepers billing for the same item when in reality one could have done the work. And the level of lawyer involved in the task is something to keep an eye out for as well. So most guidelines will say appropriate levels of lawyers should be used. If you've got a partner photocopying, for example, which amazingly we have seen, that's the sort of thing that you should be pushing back on. Rates, we would assume most big organisations have negotiated discounted rates with their law firms. That's great, but if you're not actually checking that those discounts have been applied, then you may as well have not bothered, frankly. And even small discrepancies in rates can add up, especially when most organisations are spending millions, tens of millions, sometimes even hundreds of millions on legal spend. So it's a really important area to perform checks on. Business development costs sometimes creep into bills by accident, I think. So hospitality costs, where the client's been taken to a nice sporting event or a nice restaurant or big entertainment venue, and somehow this appears in your bill. If you're not reviewing the line item detail, it can often get missed. Travel, most organisations have a travel policy, and it's important to ensure that those travel policies are adhered to. So most organisations these days will say no first class travel, for example, but there's often other travel policies that you need to make sure are being adhered to as well. So for example, some organisations will say a timekeeper can only bill for 50% of their time, and they can only charge when working on your matters, etc. Excessive time, you should always sense check and look at whether the item looks reasonable. So if it's 15 hours on email, we've already talked about what you should already do about that explanation, but also it's pretty obvious that, or unlikely, I suggest that you're going to spend 15 hours writing an email. Supervision and internal meetings is kind of a similar point, and different clients take a different view on this. I think where we sit is there's a reasonableness check that needs to happen. If there's no end of supervision and internal meetings, clearly that's not reasonable. Some level of supervision and internal meetings might be reasonable. A lot of clients will say supervision and internal meetings are not billable, and that's a position you can take, but obviously it depends on whether your firms will adhere to that or not. And if you're not checking your invoices, even if you've got that policy in place, without proper invoice checking, that won't be adhered to and you won't make those savings anyway. Item 13 is around proofreading. Unfortunately, we still see this being billed for, and you'd be amazed that it is in this day and age, as well as new file setup and handover in items 14 and 15. Not really reasonable to be billing for setting up a file and handing over matters to your colleagues, and we would push back on that typically. Research is an interesting one. Most clients will say research is not billable, and I think that's probably a reasonable position to take. You're paying your law firm for legal expertise, so why don't they know the law? I think where we've come down in certain instances where it's very bespoke, unique research, then maybe it is reasonable to charge, but generally speaking it's not chargeable, and that's something you need to look out for. Firms are quite good these days at knowing certain words won't get through systems, invoice review processes, so you need to look out for if this is couched in a different way, for example reviewing case law, etc. Allocation of work, again probably not reasonable to be billed for allocating work to a colleague. Translation costs, again it's about reasonableness. We've seen firms charge $700 an hour for translation. Well, is that reasonable? I don't think so, and certainly would advocate you should be pushing back on that. Last couple of items, administration. Again, a lot of firms still billing for this, amazingly, for things like filing, and even for submitting their invoices to you and submitting management information to you. Again, we would argue that's not billable, and just a general cost of doing business. The number of fee earners is another one that's worth looking at, and probably at a global level across all of your invoices, and this is where legal spend dashboards from these legal invoice review processes come in very handy, because you can look at whether it's reasonable, the number of fee earners that are on certain matters, and you'll often see firms just dip in and out, their fee earners or timekeepers dip in and out of individual matters because they're massive, so it's not going to get noticed, but it's incredibly inefficient if you've got too many lawyers working on matters, obviously. So that's the 20 checks. There are more as well, but they're the 20 kind of key ones as we see it. I appreciate some of you might well log off now, so thank you for listening. To those who will bear with me, I'm just going to run through some of the things that we see happening as a next step after hearing about legal invoice review. Often we'll hear people with legal budget or general counsel saying we need to manage our legal budget better, but we don't want to spend time on unnecessary admin tasks. And that's where we can help you as an organisation. And that's what I want to talk to you about a little bit on the next slide. Our process is a human-led process, although technology assisted. It's supervised by qualified lawyers to ensure that we are looking at the right things and we understand what's reasonable in terms of charging or not charging. We review each line item because we don't believe it's possible to capture all of the savings without reviewing every line item, and that really drives significant savings versus other options in the market. Our approach is very quick and easy to implement. There's no licensing fees and there's no systems integrations or change management programs you need to think about. In terms of systems integrations, often they are very costly and very time consuming, and for us, we've been in discussions with a client on a Tuesday and reviewing invoices on a Wednesday. There's not many other approaches that could get you there that quickly. I don't know of any, frankly, but there might be others out there, but certainly I think that's as quick as you're ever going to get. And if you want to drive savings quickly, this is a great solution, and we have an expert team that will really help you drive the benefits from this program. And it's a flexible approach, and it's working with some of the largest organizations in the world right now, where we're saving between 2 and 6% for those organizations. We have saved more where clients are not as sophisticated in their legal spend management processes, but that's typically what we would think you could achieve. I think the other big advantage we provide is we give our clients a dashboard that they can interrogate and evaluate the spend that they have with the law firms, and we can support them with that to look at what other opportunities there are to drive benefits with their firms. We'd love to talk to you more about it, but I'll cut myself off there. If you do want to talk to us, please have a look at the website or follow us on LinkedIn, or if you want to get in touch, please just email us at info@cooteogrady.com, and we'd be happy to have a further discussion with you. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll be in touch.